we should wait for room C to end, shouldn't we?
Is it also?
Yeah.
Is it not ended? No. Right. So we should wait then.
Okay, so we are, we ask our kind attendees to wait till our colleagues in room C are finishing their panels, and since I cannot know if this is still going on, I ask my other colleagues to tell me when that is over. Thank you.
Okay, you can go whenever you want. You
Okay.
are live.
Okay. So welcome everybody. I am Federico Pagello and I'm here as the chair for this session. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome both our speakers and our attendees, because this panel that is entitled Crime, Creative Industries and Contemporary European Media Policies will present to you a crucial part of the research that the Tech Consortium has been carrying out for the last few years. And I will say just a few words before introducing our first speaker. And these few words will just say 3 reasons why for us this panel and the research that we presented here is particularly important. The first is that the topic, the very topic of researching policies and especially providing recommendations about improvements of the European policy in the audiovisual media sector for the European Commission is a request that we received to work on this topic, as a request we received by the personnel working for the European Commission, and which, as some of you might know, unlike in other research programs, really observe and evaluate throughout the course of the project the results of our research and our work. So it was really important for us to be able to present some results that could be useful and that will be positively evaluated by those that are going to try to implement our research and recommendation about European policies. So the work that our colleagues are going to present to you is really crucial, and we want to thank all of them and those that are not presented here but that collaborated to this research, because they really helped us to complete the task that we were assigned. And the second reason is because definitely this panel proves, our research and policies, like most of the work done in the context of the text, is a truly transnational and collaborative effort. As you see in this panel, we have 2 teams in particular, the Italian and the Danish one, or actually 2 members of the University of Bologna team, and 1 member of the University of Aalborg team, and 1 member of the University of Aarhus. And these 4 people, together with other members of the TECT, have really collaborated throughout a kind of a long time period to exchange information, research information, and develop also an overall understanding of the European policies in the field that we are working on. And the third reason why also this panel is, the research presented in this panel is important for us, is that it will be soon published into public deliverables that you will find in the next few months on our website, and therefore will be available to everybody interested to know what are our conclusions on this topic. So without further ado, I start presenting our first speaker, Luca Antoniazzi, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of the Arts of the University of Bologna. He holds an MA in Cultural Economics and a PhD in Media and Communication from the University of Leeds. Prior to his academic career, he worked at the Hague Film Foundation, at the RA Archiving Department in Munich, and the Belgian Film Archive Fullerton. He's a member of the TECT, of course, and he works on different topics, but particularly the policies. And I am glad to say that Luca was a late addition to the TECT community, and it was a pleasure and to work with him. So I just leave the screen to Luca.
Thanks, Vede. First of all, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much for the introduction. And thanks to all of you for being here. First, I would like to apologize in advance. My presentation is taking more or less 20 minutes and not 15 minutes, but I'm sure that will be fine anyway. As you know from the title, I'm going to talk about the audiovisual, well, the new version of the Audiovisual Media Service Directive. Also, that was known, once known as the Directive Télévision Sans Frontières. This directive is basically, we can start with the introduction, is one of the major pieces of legislation that regulates the circulation of non-national European content across Europe. It also coordinates national policies and legislation, and it also aims at achieving extra or non-economic goals such as cultural diversity, inclusivity. The 2018 version of the directive aims at extending the range of action of the previous version to the online world. At the time of writing, many EU countries are translating the directive into their national legislation. Many countries are late with that. The European Commission has even initiated an infringement procedure for some of them. So the goal of this presentation is not to look at the outcome of these actions, of these translations, as in many cases, these initiatives have only recently been implemented. And also there's a question of, COVID-19. So it's really difficult to understand cause effects sort of dynamics. What we did was to carry out a semi-structured review as a research methodology to look at the critical reactions of leading media policy experts, academics, commentators. We collected all scientific publications that we found specifically focused on the directive that came out between 2017 and 2021. So academic papers, reports, position papers. The authors of this publication came from a wide range of European countries with a diverse media system typologies, and I refer here to Palin and Mancini typology. We brought them together and we carried out a thematic analysis to identify and isolate key themes and key issues, weaknesses, drawbacks, and potentials also. Our overarching argument is that, given the institutional context, the directive is overall a positive initiative, although its impact will be probably limited as media power is still strongly exercised by national governments. So what's new in this? So these are the tables we're working with. So we basically created these tables to summarize the literature. So what's new? The rise of OTT and VOD platforms is, of course, having a huge impact on the audiovisual landscape in Europe, and several legal initiatives have appeared in European countries to regulate the sector at the national level. These national regulations are developing fast, and through the directive, the EU has aimed at providing guidance to avoid excessive fragmentation. As emerged from our review, the changes in Article 13 are those that matter the most in this context, in this conference, and for the DETECT research group. There are others, Article 2, there are legislation or policies recommendation in terms of minor protection and in terms of audio video sharing platform, but Article 13 is probably the most important one. And there are three key policy recommendations there. The directive mandates to establish a 30% quota for European produced content in VOD libraries of big companies, big firms, encourage governments to force service providers to give content prominence and visibility, and encourages government to oblige VOD services to invest in local production. And they can do so either directly by financing new production in the country where they offer the service, or indirectly via levy-based contribution to public funding bodies in charge to support of the local audiovisual production. So this is already an interesting point, because there is a derogation of what's called the country of origin principle. That means that in the past, the service provider was subject to the legislation of the country in which the headquarters was set up. With the directive, things changed slightly, so that the service provider is also subject to the legislation of the country in which the service is actually provided. We will split this presentation in two parts. I will split in two parts. First, we address the positive of the directive, and in the second part, the weaknesses. So the positives: tackling extra economic goals or non-economic goals. Many writers have stressed that the potential of the directive to be used to pursue non-economic goals in a non-rhetorical way. It's not what they think, what they argue is that this non-economic goals, cultural priorities, inclusivity, it's not part of a empty rhetorical discourse. For instance, Apa and Gangemi acknowledge that the conversations and discussion on the role of OTT and VOD in the EU have been characterized by economic instrumentalism over the years, over the past 20 years. But they know that the directive seriously takes into account educational and diversity goals. Quotas, for example, they can safeguard, they say, cultural diversity. They quote Ivan Bernier here, and I quote him now too. This does not signify that the quotas in question are a panacea, but it does mean that under the appropriate condition and subject to monitoring of their actual effectiveness, they may play a deciding role in preservation and promotion of threatened cultural expression. So there are other initiatives, for instance, the legislation on minors, or the recognition of the importance of prominence that they actually appreciate. And it seems that what they say is that there is a move from a purely economicistic, what they call economicistic approach to cultural policy to a more cultural-led, if you want, policy. Legitimation of good practice. Donders and colleagues point out that the goal of the directive should be understood as a legitimation of good practice already taking place in some countries to foster process of policy transfer so that good practice can travel across Europe. The report in question refers specifically to financial contribution by VOD players to local industry. And they suggest, they put forward several good practices that should be implemented EU-wide. The most important one, I think, is that government should rely on levy-based contribution to public bodies, as it is the easiest and most efficient way to collecting what is due from VOD. So contribution through direct investment in new production can also be viable, but they can create excessive market concentration and potentially vertical integration. So the big guys remain, will stay big, basically. Moreover, BODs often retain managerial control over creative labor, which could inhibit content diversity rather than enhancing it. There are other initiatives that they advocate for, transparency of information disclosure, or they argue that legislation created to translate the directives is sounder if based on a diverse rationale, such as economic, level playing field, cultural, and innovation. Basically, I think what they say here is that really the directive can be used to build good policy and can be used to justify positive policy initiative in the single member states. Good balance. Jenny Vinand, a policy expert, stresses that given the institutional content we're considering, the directive is a well-thought piece of legislation that strikes a good balance among a different and diverse group of stakeholders with often divergent interests. She writes that, I quote, "The directive has enabled the sector to strive and bring to the fore new kinds of services to the benefit of consumers." She also, and I end the quote, she also observes that the reason for its loose and versatile definition are related to negotiation among stakeholders, as I said, and not only to the weaknesses of EU institutions. Diversity of social and regulatory contexts, technologies, changes, market changes, inevitably require a very flexible legislation. So it seems that the EU has already chosen what the European Broadcasting Union champions as a principle-based legislation that focus on policy goals rather than clearly defined solutions and tools or toolkits. So let's now talk about the weaknesses of the directive. So loose definitions. As implied in the last section, some authors lament the vagueness and the widely interpretable legal instruction found in the directive. According to most commentators, This a substantial number of commentators. This inevitably implies that the initiative will have little impact on the homogenization of European media law. Take quotas, for instance. Even if the directive advocates, quotas, vagueness remains, as it then becomes a question on how the 30% is calculated. Numbers of episodes, numbers of series, numbers of titles, length. The definition of prominence is also problematic. Prominence is a very key concept here, because as Spanish writer Garcia Leyva writes, and I quote, platform promote only content commercially viable for them. Those contents dedicated to minorities or niche audiences or genres get buried. And we found similar things in another strands of the tech research that confirming this. However, the vagueness is not only the product of EU political weakness or business-friendly attitude or underestimation of the importance of diversity. Intricate algorithmic, commercial, and editorial logic coexist and shape interfaces, and therefore shape also interaction between audiences and such interfaces. And they're difficult to detect and regulate. In fact, if we look at the national policy in this respect, in respect of prominence, we see that the vagueness of the directive is also present in national policies. The European Audiovisual Observatory states that only 10 countries in the EU formally acknowledge the importance of prominence measures in their national policies. And I quote here, general obligation refers to obligation which are not expressed in form of concrete measures. So it's objectively difficult to police prominence. And even for institutions that can actually have the power to really intervene in policy making, as national governments. Now, fragmentation and rivalry. Controversy related to the country of origin principle remains substantially unaddressed, as the derogation that we mentioned before seems to be insufficient to some. Some writers have noted that the country of origin principle, while making circulation easier, fosters unfair competition among member states on terms and conditions offered to international players looking for favorable fiscal and business environment. States compete to attract investment as corporation, and I quote Antonio Vlasis here, quote, can use the country of origin principle to cherry pick the location of their European headquarters. This can therefore, and I end the quote here, this can therefore encourage fragmentation at the political level and rivalry and even illegal behaviors. Here, the case of big tech in islands and Luxembourg fiscal policies are relevant. I quote here Evans and colleagues. In 2016, the Commission found an Ireland gave illegal tax benefits to Apple worth of 13 billion. On the year later, it ruled that Luxembourg granted undue tax benefits to Amazon of around 250 million. And I end the quote. Netflix, in fact, has moved in the Netherlands for fiscal reasons too. So, in line with suggestion by European Coalition for Cultural Diversity, the directive introduces the derogation of the country of origin principle, and that can be taken as a positive initiative. But at the same time, because it allows local industry to benefit from investment or new resources, but at the same time, it can also foster political competition and rivalry among countries to basically compete to offer a better business environment and fiscal environment. So last point, the absence of future-led policies. If the directive does a good job in legitimizing with balance current good practice, this inevitably entails the fact that it, and I quote again Jenny Vinand, fails to provide a more future-oriented outlook, which in turn could have set incentives for the industry to invest in and develop secure technical tools. And I end the quote. And we could also add that investment could have involved labor or organization, business models, financial investments. The directive takes therefore a reactive rather than a proactive approach to policy making, renouncing, and so the EU renounces to a leadership role in operationalizing the policy principle it advocates. But as we know, the space, one could ask whether would calling for proactivity not be unrealistic? As we know, media power is in the hand of the government. And after all, the European Commission did propose more substantial intervention in several areas, including corporate tax rules in 2018, but member states simply did not reach an agreement on fundamental issues. So it's not always the EU to blame, basically. And I conclude, I think it's already pretty clear the message I'm trying to send here. So despite some limitation, the directive remains a positive initiative. Member states can use it to embody fruitful policy principle into national legislation, but it will not trigger revolutionary changes. Simply put, cultural and media policy remains in the hand of national governments, with the EU occupying a marginal position. And the directive does not even try to challenge this. Thus, we think that fostering a shared strategy through public service media outlets would be a more fruitful way forward. We will provide some ideas in the deliverable we will publish. Although I should stress that it will not nor exhaustive nor easy to implement the idea we will put forward. There is no magic trick. In other words, to foster, ignite reforms and foster cohesion and solidarity. It simply is, but I think there is a need for those who believe in the benefits of being together, or better, those who believe in that the benefits of being together outweigh the drawbacks, perhaps to take action. And I think as researchers, we should perhaps implement more normative and agenda setting research to evaluate plausible ways forward. And I think also that as far as the media policy research is concerned, we should pay more attention to the cultural policy. So trying to understand what do we mean exactly by self-identity, or what do we mean by human flourishing through cultural consumption? What do we mean by rootedness or sense of place? And now we can embody these principles into policy making. I mean, it's a challenge, but maybe it's, well, I think it's worth taking it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you very much for having opened this panel with some very useful overall points. But since time is always limited, we move immediately to the second speaker, Luka Bara, Associate Professor of Television and Digital Media Studies at the Department of the Arts at the University of Bologna. His research mainly focuses on production distribution cultures, the international circulation of media products, and the evolution of the contemporary media landscape. He has published 3 books, edited 5 collections, and many journal articles and essay journals and book collections. I am particularly thankful for Luca for having joined the project as soon as it started, and having taken the responsibility actually to lead the research and politics for the Bologna research team. So I'm happy to leave the screen to him for his presentation, which is entitled "Make It Circulate: Localization, Dubbing, and the Support to European Non-National Crime Drama." Not hear you. We cannot hear you, Luca. Can you try to speak because you're Luka? Do you hear him? No. Your microphone is on, but you cannot be heard. Let's see if I can mute and unmute you. Try it now. What a nice surprise. Luka Bara non si sente. Oh my God. So maybe we can move to the other two presentations while we solve this issue, which is very bizarre, but I'm glad to present our next two speakers that are actually going to give two different papers. The first paper is presented by Kathleen Ellen Bengesser and Kim Topfanzer, whereas the other one is presented by Kim Topfanzer and Catherine Bengesser. Two real pillars of this project, not only in the policy aspects. I present first Catherine because she's the first speaker. She is currently assistant professor for digital media industries in the Department of Media and Journalism Studies at Aarhus University. She has received her PhD from Birkbeck University in 2019, where she researched how public service broadcasters in Europe use television drama to reaffirm their legitimacy in a global television market. She has many research interests, and she has proven that in her collaboration in the tag, in the frame of which she has been a postdoctoral researcher, and she has worked on many different things, including the development of the Detect Aarhus Hub, the study of European crime TV audiences, and research on European policies. And you know, she has been really active, and she's presenting in several panels across this conference. So maybe you have already met her somewhere else. Kim Topfanzer is associate professor of media studies at Aalborg University. His research focuses on audiovisual crime fiction and screen production, with a special attention toward a relationship between local and global media. He has published extensively on crime fiction and television studies, including the co-authored book Locating Nordic Noir, 2017, and the volume European Television Crime Drama and Beyond, 2018. In the text, Kim has been invaluable. He has played a key role not only as the leader of one of the key packages entitled Key Work Packages entitled Creative Industries, but for his incredibly hard work, ability to coordinate complex activity carried out by international group of scholars, his attention to detail, and once again, the passion like everybody else here, he has shown for the whole project. So the first of their two papers is entitled Evaluating Creative Europe's TV Programming Scheme, Geographical Imbalances in Fiction Funding Decisions. And the screen is yours.
Thank you, Federico, for your kind introduction of our research. Can you now see my slides in full screen mode?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, now I lost my slide. There we go. As you heard, we're co-presenting two papers based on the same research. We're actually sitting in the same room. So that is nice that at least the Danish teams can meet right now. My presentation is going to talk you through the why we chose to focus on Creative Europe's TV programming scheme, what our research questions were and our methods, as well as some of the key findings before Kim digs into some of the details concerning, and I'm doing a spoiler here, the success of the Nordic crime productions. So the media program is part of the Creative Europe scheme, and it has the aim to I quote, increase the capacity of audiovisual operators to develop audiovisual works with the potential to circulate, as well as to facilitate European and international co-production. And the TV programming scheme reflects that. We have been looking at the 2014 to 2020 period, and particularly at the TV programming scheme, which gives support to fiction, animation, and documentary productions in order to achieve these goals mentioned by the media program, supporting productions that can circulate well as creating new opportunities for co-production and co-funding. And all of that is also aimed to support the independent production industry in Europe, which is reflected in the fact that only productions can be supported by the scheme if the rights to the productions revert to the independent producers after 7 to 10 years. What can you get from the TV programming scheme? That's up to €1 million for the independent producers if they have managed to get 3 broadcasters from 3 countries on board. So from the application basics, this screams Europudding to you. But we'll see it's not as bad as it sounds in the beginning. What the program is focused on is, now my presentation has disappeared. What the program focuses on in its evaluation is products that have a European dimension, and I'll not get into the details of that because of time. When we look at some of the products that have received the TV programming funding, we can see how central the TV programming scheme is to what we in this project have been researching, namely high-end crime fiction. I brought you some examples from the different funding rounds that we've looked at, and my case study is actually the first one that received €1 million, which was The Last Panthers, which came out in 2015. It's a co-production between a French and a British production company. It has 3 broadcasters on board, Sky, Canal+, and Sky Atlantic, representing the UK, France, and the US. And it has powerful distributors behind it, which also serves to explain the fact that it was successfully sold to 120 territories. So here we can really see a production that fulfilled the aims of fostering co-production and circulating well. And as an additional bonus, the producer from the British production company said that in his experience, having EU funding in your mix actually makes the series more attractive to buyers and can potentially also increase the prices that are being paid. So that sounds like a really good package for the independent producers that get the money. So this is the motivation why we looked at the TV programming scheme. We subsequently investigated how these nearly €50 million have been distributed across the EU for the over 80 fiction titles that have gotten the funding. I'll quickly skip this slide. What we've done is looked at the application statistics and reviewed the funding decisions. We then focused on the funding for the TV dramas and amended the data with like additional knowledge, like genre classification and the location of the production companies, as well as the co-production relationships. We then investigated the co-production relationships further by performing a network analysis using Gephi. I'll show you the visualization later. And then we turned from the quantitative to the qualitative and spoke to a representative of the Danish Creative Europe desk, explaining talking about the success of Denmark, but also some of the reasons behind the shortcomings in when we look at the applications of the countries. And we were scoping perspectives on the future Creative Europe program by talking to representatives from Creative Europe. So I've told you nearly 15 million euro are in the game for fiction production, and the winner is Sweden. Most of the money, like Sweden has had 10 million euro. And also you'll find Norway and Denmark, these small Scandinavian countries, very top in the ranking, as well as the big producers, Germany and France. But as you'll see, there is 0 Eastern European country in this mix. And that that was one of the main things that caught our interest, but also the underrepresentation of Italy and Spain, which are also big producers. But why are they not represented in this scheme? So we see the absolute dominance of Northwestern Europe and only very few fiction productions from our new EU member states. We see that there is some mechanisms that balance out these inequalities. For example, France has it far harder to get a production funded through the scheme than the smaller applicants. However, the Eastern European countries are not even applying. And when we look at the Southern European countries, it becomes really striking that we have this lack of applications because there is actually high production capacity. And when we look to the example of Spain, there is a huge demand for Spanish content, like on the SVOD services. And then we look at our country here, Denmark, with an average success rate of nearly 50%. So there is some imbalances here that need to be explained. When we look at the co-productions, we see the absolute dominance of the well-rehearsed team that is the Scandinavians and the Germans. The Scandinavian and Central European cluster has brought us hits like The Bridge, but also more recently the production Stillborn, a pandemic thriller. We have co-productions between France and the Nordics. These are newer, and we could say that the TV programming scheme has helped support those co-productions emerging. This would, for example, be the upcoming thriller Blackport, which is an Icelandic-French co-production. And last, we have what we termed occasional affinities, which is the underrepresented countries occasionally working together. For example, Italy and US with My Brilliant Friend, or Agua Seca, which is a Portuguese-Spanish co-production. And in the very last funding round, one Eastern European fiction production actually got funding, which is The Last Socialist Artifact. It's a co-production between former Yugoslavic countries. So where is the East? We saw that the Eastern European countries are hardly ever applying. Poland and Czech Republic, we have some applications. But actually, when we look at the productions that have received funding, we can see that they are present, but as either co-producers or as the locations in which series have been filmed, or they have contributed funding, for example, through the Czech Tax Incentive, but they are not the main applicants and not the main producers. Our project has also found that Romania and Hungary rely mostly on the quality productions from actors like HBO Europe, but HBO Europe does not necessarily comply with the funding rules that make it possible for you to apply, which is that the rights have to revert to the independent producer. So that's a problem. What we also heard from our experts was that being at the European rights markets is so key to getting the co-production deals that you need in order to get this funding. And not all the countries have the same opportunities to be present and seen at these markets. When we look at Southern Europe, we have a different dynamic. As I said before, there is a huge number of productions happening in Italy and Spain. Spain has been really booming in the last years, but not applying for the TV programming scheme because these productions were mainly going towards Netflix. And our expert from Denmark explained it like this. We haven't seen many Spanish applications because the entire Spanish production environment has been bought up by Netflix. So why apply for European funding if your video on demand service is paying for all of it? So here we see the European funding system actually being completely locked out of these new services. To conclude, I've summarized our findings into 5 different policy dilemmas. On the one hand, we see this absolute dominance of the Northwestern European countries, but one could argue that that's good because the Scandinavian content, Nordic noir, is also what circulates very well and what has a high share in the SVOD catalogs. So if you're funding the Northern Europeans, you're actually funding content that will end up in the VOD catalogs. However, we can also see that Creative Europe risks missing out on new trends, for example, the emergence of the Southeastern productions, which we have documented in the project as well. Another area of policy dilemmas concerns the use of public resources. The funds for creative industries in the EU are very limited. So one should argue that they go towards productions that will fulfill the policy goals. So again, giving funding to the Northern Europeans makes sense. However, the beneficiary nations we've seen overrepresented are often those that already have very good local funding structures. For example, France, Germany, and Denmark. So there's lots of national and local funding available. And on top of that, they're overrepresented in the European funding. One of the goals of Creative Europe is the support for independent production. And the beneficiary nations are successful because they have a production ecology where the independents are already in a position where they can argue for these rights that are necessary to these rights conditions that are necessary for applying for Creative Europe. But again, there's an imbalance because in the Eastern and Southern European countries, the producers do not necessarily have the same conditions, and that keeps them from applying. We saw an overrepresentation of public service broadcasters in the awards, and we could say that's good because they are still far outweighing the SVODs when it comes to commissioning content that is of high quality and also local. And they often also have to abide by these beneficial rules for independent producers. On the other hand, the rules are really not made for the VOD platforms. So again, it's a question of missing out on trends. And lastly, in terms of co-productions, we see that the money goes to the big Western nations that have really good co-production networks already going for them. So it's good because it will be good co-productions with experienced partners. However, there was only limited evidence of new networks actually forming. And we believe that the upcoming Creative Europe program will actually help to address this by reducing the amount of countries that you have to have on board. So if you only have 2 partners, it might actually be easier to form a new relationship with a new country rather than having 3 on board. And this is where I'll end because I think I've gone over time.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for this enlightening presentation and analysis of this funding scheme. If I understand correctly, Kim's presentation will follow through the themes and so on. So we move to Kim's presentation, which I have already introduced, and then we will finish with Luca.
Okay, now you can hear me, just to try. Okay.
Please.
Please, Kim, the screen is yours. Here, Kim now, because he doesn't have the mic on.
Yeah, there we go. You see my screen now, right? Perfect. Here, I will depart directly from Katrin's overall assessment of the TV programming scheme and look more closely at the genres that appear in our data sets. As the title here suggests, there is a clear predilection for crime narratives in the funding system, and Katrin has already touched upon that. And by itself, this is an interesting feature for a crime fiction project like Detect. However, as we may conclude, it may be hard to give the Creative Europe program as such credit for the transnational circulation implied in the funding scheme's evaluation criteria. When the scheme was published, a Scandinavian-German production cluster stood ready with an overall production ecology that fitted the scheme very well. I will return to that argument in a bit. Firstly, I wish to dwell a bit with the idea of TV crime series as transcultural communication, as this is the main objective or ideal of the EU cultural funding system. In the Creative Europe program in general, and not just the TV scheme, this is rooted in what is often referred to as the European added value in an evaluation criteria. Most importantly, a European dimension in Creative Europe's funding for creative and cultural industries is manifest in how well projects co-funded by the program travel across and beyond the continent. The motivation driving such circulation is cultural awareness across nations and cultures, hence ideally becoming acts of communication that, with the words of Andreas Hepp, promote differences that transcend various traditional cultures. This paper is not the place to critically scrutinize what transnational communication actually is by definition. Instead, our point here is that transcending individual cultures is an ideal strove towards by policymakers in the EU. But before dealing with the genres represented in the TV programming scheme, I wish to give you a concrete example, one that has also been funded by the TV scheme, that is, The Team. The second season of The Team appears in our dataset, and in many ways this serves as the perfect example of the idealism implied in the scheme. In production, it involved 5 different European producers and 7 European broadcasters, these from 7 different European countries. And the series tells the story in 6 different languages about 3 local detective teams investigating international border-crossing crime through close transnational collaboration. Upon the first season, the former EBU director, Annika Nyberg-Frankenhäuser, said that this exciting new crime series shows that television, like the European Song Contest, can bring Europeans together. Series like Borgen brought global acclaim and showed that language is no barrier to the international success of made-in-Europe fiction, and The Team adds something new to the mix. It is the first genuine European series of its kind. On the one hand, Frankenhäuser is not right in her historical assessment of the originality of the show, but that's not the point that I wish to make here. Rather, what strikes me in this quote is the way that she equates series like Borgen and The Team with the Eurovision Song Contest, a show that at its highest have well over 200 million viewers in and beyond Europe. In other words, Eurovision serves as an example of transcultural communication, for better or worse. And the policy agenda implied in Frankenhäuser's evaluation of The Team's potential speaks directly into the same interest in creating transculturality across European borders. In the same interview, Frankenhäuser highlights that there is a solid history of co-production in the genre, which for us builds a bridge into creative Europe's predilection for crime series and the Scandinavian German cluster that I will return to in a bit. In the period from 2014 to 20, the TV scheme co-funded 83 fictional TV series in total. We evaluated each program qualitatively according to information available regarding genre. Such information was derived from the Internet Movie Database and production companies' own genre qualifications. In addition, samples of the data were amended by additional research for specific programs, including watching, annotating, and genre qualifying the shows. The data quality was boosted by further information from original broadcasters. In the end, the fiction program was broken down into 6 large estimated genre categories, that is crime, history, drama, fantasy, comedy, and other, which includes the lack of genre affiliation. Naturally, a number of series, such as Babylon Berlin, implies genre hybridity, and in such cases, the most dominant genre was preferred. As the genre plot devices and the storyline in, for instance, Babylon Berlin is a crime story, and as IMDb users use crime as the most prominent genre, the series was registered as a crime narrative. The result of this genre estimation is an overwhelming dominance of crime narratives in the TV scheme. No less than 44 out of the 83 co-funded European series are, by a majority of IMDb users and through our own genre qualifications, deemed to be TV crime series. Firstly, this shows a comparatively strong difference from the genres represented in European film funding opportunities, where crime plays a diminutive role, as pointed out by Stefano Baschiera and Marcus Schleich in our forthcoming Detect report on European cultural mobility. Secondly, the crime genre has been highlighted as the genre that is easiest to co-produce, for instance, by a number of scholars and producers, among others, Ib Bonnebjerg and Ivano Redvald, and also my own collaboration with the Danish broadcaster TV2. On the one hand, this points back to the point raised by Frankenhäuser about the history of co-production within the genre. On the other, however, it also maintains a range of specific genre traits that may work well in stories transcending internationally or internally European geographical boundaries, including crimes and detectives trespassing borders both within and beyond the European continent. The result is then that when the calls in the TV scheme ask specifically for the European added value, implying potential to co-produce and travel internationally, the crime genre seems to have an advantage from the get-go. However, as we see a general dominance of the crime genre across the European continent, essentially a raison d'etre for the whole Detect project, one final question needs to be answered. Why do we see such a dominance from only 5 countries in the TV funding scheme, if the crime genre is an all-pervading international genre? In order to reply to this, we need to return to Frankenhäuser's reference to the long history of co-production within the genre. If we look at the top 4 receivers of funding for TV fiction in the TV scheme, we find that the 3 Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and Germany, take home no less than 65% of the fiscal share and 61% of the grants in total. Such a dominant bias towards only 4 North European countries indicates that the crime genre alone is not the sole reason, and that it needs an explanation that has more to do with production ecologies and pre-established creative affinities among the 4 countries. If we even include the funding that went to Iceland and Finland, the Nordic cluster by itself is strongly represented by taking home 53% of the total funding for TV fiction programming in the European Creative Europe program from 2014 to 20. In fact, the Nordic countries and Germany have a prehistory of strong co-production and co-funding relationship among each other. Through both Norvision and the Nordic Film and TV Fund, the Nordic countries have an institutionalized co-production relationship, while Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish languages share similar linguistic features, making them mutually understandable. Although co-production between the three countries is not considered linguistic co-production. As I have highlighted with Anna-Marit Vode in locating Nordic Noir, German co-funding has been instrumental in boosting the production value of especially Danish and Swedish crime series, as well as their international distribution. This started as early as the 1990s in the German-Swedish collaboration on 6 adaptations of the novels by the quintessential crime writers Sjöwall and Wahlöö, including collaboration between broadcasters SVT in Sweden and RTL in Germany. This continued in a range of collaborations with especially German ZDF on the Beck series, the Wallander series, the Emmy award-winning series The Eagle, and the very important role played by ZDF Enterprises in the worldwide distribution of the Danish series The Killing. In other words, international collaboration within the Nordic region has a decade-long prehistory, while the German connection in especially Nordic crime series cannot be underestimated. This feeds into the funding results of the Creative Europe TV scheme. Here, the Nordic-German co-production was found in almost 1 in every 4 fiction titles supported by the TV programming scheme, that is 23%. Either among the Nordic countries or by including German collaboration, the required collaboration between at least 3 countries in the 2014 to 20 scheme seems almost mechanical in accessing funding from the TV programming scheme. Therefore, the Nordic-German cluster appears as the very strongest in the network of co-production supported by the TV programming scheme. Because the production ecology and the already established creative relationships between the countries fitted the policy of the TV programming scheme very well. Altogether, this then comes as no surprise that the crime genre takes home over half of the funding of TV fiction in Creative Europe program. Interestingly enough, when Germany is awarded funding as a majority producer, the genre affinity is most often historical. As a producer of crime narratives, they regularly appear in the dataset as a minority co-producer on Nordic crime series instead. On the one hand, this is based on the long history of what eventually becomes the international attention towards Nordic Noir. On the other, it tells an interesting story about the important hidden role played by Germany in the international propagation of Nordic Noir, and not least, how Creative Europe may have ended up strengthening the already strong transnational production ecologies in the period in 2014 to 20. These were my words, and here I leave you with just a brief reference to some of the material that is already available out there. Our policy brief that I co-wrote with Katrin is already available on the Detect website, and the forthcoming Detect report on cultural mobility is will be available very shortly on the Detect website as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. I think that we are quite late according to our original schedule. We can, of course, go a bit longer than expected, but I immediately give back the floor to Luka Bara, which I already introduced before. So You can start whenever you want.
Okay, now just to make sure you are hearing me and you are seeing my slides. So let's go on. Sorry for the technical issues before. Good morning to everyone. Thanks very much to Federico, to the organizers of the conference, to all the people involved in the DETECT project, to all the colleagues and friends attending this panel. The things that I'm going to say here are actually building as the speech, the paper given by Luca Antoniazzi on deliverable 6.3, which is titled Transcultural Diversity on Transnational VOD Platforms. It is still a bit of a work in progress. It's building also a bit on the policy brief we are now preparing and on all the fruitful discussions that along these years have happened inside a smaller policy group of the DETECT project, and I want to thank everyone for the input. I also especially need to thank here all the contributors to 6.3, as Alvaro Luna, Catherine Bengesser, and especially Luca Antoniazzi for his work in shaping with me this deliverable and in managing the research below and most parts of the writing. The issue that I will address here is actually kind of a smaller one if compared with the things we were discussing in the previous parts of this panel, but it was actually a question that was happened along the way. It was a bit asked by the EU, and we needed to address the issue of adaptation, localization, and especially dubbing. And I will try to put together some of the first results that we have tried to collect along this research path and this research line. So let's start from kind of a already known fact, the fact that foreign content, audiovisual television content coming from other countries, coming from other places is more and more circulating, and this circulation, this transnational circulation, has increased in recent years, also thanks, of course, to the global and local video on demand platforms, which are more or less the main character of this deliverable. This is, of course, an ongoing process. It's not established at all. It has changing characteristics, changing rules, and so on. Many questions have been asked by scholars, by researchers, by ourselves, in order to better understand this kind of circulation. And usually we are asking questions, and it has been also partially addressed today and across the conference, on what kind of content actually travels transnationally, on how many titles are traveling, which is the quantity of foreign content, of European non-national content. And so, of course, it has to address the depth and the richness of the video-on-demand libraries, the question already touched by Luca of the prominence of specific titles that kind of follow commercial, editorial, sometimes algorithmical reasons, and so on. In this portion of the work, we wanted to address a slightly different question, which is often underlooked, which is in which ways this content, this audiovisual, this television content travels abroad, in what forms, in how many ways, following which path. Our content is prepared, our content is changed. In some ways we wanted, and this kind of question helps us in better underlining the role and the relevance of a fruitful, of a meaningful encounter with the audience. We are often thinking about this kind of text as something that's stays more or less the same, actually there are many changes affecting the very nature of the text. In television industry, there is a classic term that is adopted to define this kind of foreign content, which is ready-made, already finished, ready to be broadcast on television schedules or released in digital platforms. If we give a closer look, though we can easily notice how this readiness is just partial, is not ready at all. We can see here in this slide kind of a scheme touching the long, varied and stratified process of national mediation. There are a lot of steps, a lot of professionals involved. There's a constant, strong negotiation between the international distribution and the local needs. This kind of operation kind of have a direct textual impact with subtitling, dubbing practices, adaptation, localization, and so on. But we need also to take into account a long series of other changes, of other variations, of other kind of reframing that have a more indirect contextual impact. The acquisition process, the scheduling one, the choice of a release date, the marketing and promotion happening in every country, in every market, and so on. Everything more or less deeply or lightly transforms the foreign content to make it more effective to a local audience. And of course, we need to take into account also this effectiveness of the transnational circulation paths and so on. Of course, we have dealt in the research with many ways of this localization, of this adaptation, and so on. Scripted format adaptations are a tool that make ideas circulate across Europe. We have seen that in many panels, in some keynotes, and also Luca Antoniazzi has brought a portion of deliverable 6.3 on this very aspect. But of course, it's not just that. There is also a ready-made program that deals with both a language transfer and a cultural transfer. There is subtitling. I do not want to underline, to kind of obliterate the very important role of subtitling that, among other things, also helps a lot to promote and to safeguard minority language. For instance, as Alvaro Luna has well demonstrated in the same deliverable, where you will find, as soon as we will publish it, the work on dubbing as well. Here, though, I want to stress that the focus especially on dubbing, because it has shown a relevant role that is playing in actually building a more cohesive and diverse Europe and European culture through the crime drama circulation. Dubbing is often downplayed, is often contested, so all this kind of line of reasoning looks quite counterintuitive. Yet I hope to be able to show how it is important to take into account the dubbing and to take it into account as well at the policy level, which is not dealing with this issue. We all know that the European media landscape is a fragmented one. There are national markets, supranational geocultural regions. There are different media systems. Other lines of fracture that we can distinguish is the one between subtitling and dubbing countries. I'm very much simplifying everything here, but the companies that are operating in larger countries tend to use dubbing to circulate foreign audiovisual materials, while those operating in smaller markets tend to use subtitling more. In fact, there's an economic reason. Dubbing is far more expensive than subtitling. Thus, it is economically sustainable only for markets large enough for audiences large enough, for products that appeal to audiences large enough. But it is also one of the more effective ways to get in touch with non-national content, audiovisual content. It gets results. with the audience. And this is the reason, also an economic reason, it is made that is not changing so much. Of course, we need, I'm simplifying here, we need to also take into account cultural history. We need to take into account policy and prestige hierarchies. In choosing dubbing over subtitling, there are commercial aspects, but also aesthetic aspects, also cultural aspects, which are constantly at play. But it is important to take into account this complexity, to kind of go beyond the classic dualism between subtitling and dubbing approaches, in order to think through European language policy in the contemporary media, television, digital platforms, and so on, because both practices can actually be useful in different contexts and for different social groups. There is kind of a strong evidence about that. The experience of paid television and premium programming in continuing to use together with the subtitled versions, also the dubbed version, was already quite clear. But now there is Netflix, there is the on-demand market, and it is becoming even more clear the relevance, the popularity of dubbing. So major players in the industry have strongly invested and are still continuing to invest strongly in dubbing, essentially to allow a smoother flow of content around the world, to exploit economies of scale, and so on. Netflix is kind of a key player in implementing this kind of strategy. So of course, exporting, as always, dubbed US content, but also offering dubbed non-US content, including a lot of European crime dramas to North Americans and to people everywhere else in the world. So the data that are being collected by major industry players already show that this is the most cost-efficient strategy to increase circulation. To offer both subtitled and dubbed content lets the audience decide which they prefer. Netflix, with the usual understatement we all know, have already declared through Deborah Chin, which is Netflix Director of International Dubbing, we are literally creating a new audience for this kind of content, thanks to dubbing, where the dubbing was not used before. You can see here some titles. At the same time, it is reporting and publicity, but dubbing revolution, the public demands it. Even Americans are embracing dubbing. We may say we want subtitles, but our preference and the default setting is the dubbed version, and so on. So we have Netflix and other major players which are distributing dubbed European content everywhere in both dubbed and subtitled form. And crime drama, as the examples that you can see here, plays a fundamental role. They have been highly successful abroad and in other European countries as well. Sherlock, which is from BBC, but also circulates broadly as a Netflix original in brackets, Lupin, La Casa de Papel, Money Heist, and so on. As far as crime fiction is concerned, Netflix has reported that for big hits such as Money Heist and Lupin, most people, even in subtitling countries, prefer to watch the show dubbed. However, the proportion of preferred subtitle is still significant. We have a lot of young people, higher education, higher income audiences that prefer subtitling, and a large mainstream audience that actually prefers dubbing. So we have, on the one hand, kind of a banal affirmation that subtitles help a lot diversity and inclusiveness. But at the same time, we need to consider as also dubbing is kind of helping another way, another layer, another trajectory towards this diversity, towards this regional, national, cultural inclusive-ness. Since it helps foreign language productions to travel effectively, to actually meet the audiences, to become an easier cultural encounter. So going towards some ideas that still are a bit undercooked, and we will develop better in the policy brief we are actually drafting in the next few weeks. we can see some points at least. One is the issue of quality, of a quality dubbing. Often dubbing has been underlooked also because it was made quickly and cheaply and so on. Actually, a good dubbing is a way to lower the access barriers to non-national European content, to foreign content as a whole. The need to go towards trusted suppliers is kind of a counterbalance to the commercial need to reduce the timings and costs. And Netflix is very keen in reducing timings and costs, so it is probably helpful to intervene in counterbalancing this aspect. Another aspect is the need to sustain the dubbing for minor productions as a way to increase diversity. There are higher costs for dubbing. These costs are quite hard to be sustained for minor countries and products and so on. They need to be covered, and policies can here help. So here, ideally, European crime drama and all the other media products should be available, should be made available in both subtitled and original languages to embrace large and diverse audiences. There is an increased autonomy of choice. It works in favor of diversity. Dubbing can enable media products to cross national borders more easily, to remove language barriers, to access those European countries unfamiliar with subtitling, to allow material produced also in smaller countries to circulate into bigger markets. And it would not be surprising as well to see crime drama audiences used to watching dubbed videos, then switching to subtitles once a strong connection is created. And this will, in a way or another, grant also more visibility to regional cultures. So a good dubbing can reduce the barrier to access to some non-national European content and create an actual transnational market more easily. European citizens, especially to those with a lower cultural capital, can prefer dubbing to subtitles. Having crime drama readily available with both the solutions can remove potentially the barriers to non-national European content for those with lower education levels, class-related disadvantages, elder people, providing a more diverse viewing experience. And we need also to take into account the usual laziness that actually is the one that gets us in front of the TV screen, that crosses the most of our audiovisual consumption. And so, of course, this laziness works towards the dubbing. So as a possible conclusion, European content should be available in both subtitled and dubbed forms in order to appeal to the widest and most diverse audiences as possible. This asks decisions at the policy level, not to leave these issues in the exclusive hands of the global and commercial platforms like it is now. Dubbing as well as subtitling and scripted format adaptation can become a useful tool to direct European non-national narratives also towards mainstream, larger audiences. And of course, a European banal identity can also be built here, and with the help of the most popular of the genres, of the television genre, which is crime drama. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Luca for this last presentation that really brings together a number of issues that we have discussed, and the topic is really interesting, but I will refrain from comment or ask any question because we basically have finished the time we had initially planned for this session, and we really want to hear any question that the audience can have. You can raise your your virtual hand, and we can make you speak and be seen on camera if you want, or you can write your question in the question section. So we will wait for you. Okay, we will wait for you to give us a sign. Monica Dall'Asta, I will make you visible. Wait a second. Is there anyone there of our staff that can, I have, my computer is stuck.
Yes, I do. Yes, that's okay. Now, Monica can talk and show.
So thank you so much for your presentation. It was really, really, the whole panel was really very interesting. I had the privilege to go through your draft for the deliverable, for our deliverable 6.3. And I think you all have done a really great job. So I don't really have a question, maybe a comment or a little provocation if you want, because which follows through Luca's call for a promotion of the linguistic diversity in Europe, but also what all of you have said about the new directive and the policies of the Creative Europe program, or better, the performances of the different countries within the Creative Europe program. What I was thinking is that to make the case of Italy, the underperformance of Italy in attracting European funds is actually a well-known problem, a general problem, also beyond the media field, also beyond the Creative Europe program. I don't know about other countries. Certainly, I don't know about about Eastern European countries. But I am, how can I say? I guess the situation may not be so different from what we have here in Italy. And so I'm wondering, beyond the difficulties we can have in terms of organization in the administrative structure of the applicants, this is something that we know very well also in Italy. I'm wondering, may also there be a linguistic explanation? And I mean, what could be, in your opinion, the role of the Anglocentrism of the European institutions in terms of projects evaluation, in hampering the ability of the Eastern and the Southern countries to get funded within European programs? We know, it's true, we know that proposals can be submitted in any language, but we also know that everybody takes for granted that applications have to be submitted in English. So don't you think that this may represent an important disadvantage for Southern and Eastern European countries, whose languages are, I mean, in terms of structure, in terms of lexicon, are so farther away from English than Northern European languages? What do you think about this? I've been thinking about this a lot during this project, because I actually think that being forced to write in English, especially for us humanistic scholars, is such a, how can I say, a disadvantage, really. I mean, we cannot channel so much of our thinking in a language, at least I mean for us who come from Southern European countries and have a language based on a Neo-Latin structure. But, well, I don't know, it's just a provocation, maybe not so crucial in terms of what you have researched, that I just wanted to share these thoughts.
Thank you, Monica. We have been looking at the work that is involved in making those applications, and that's also something that came back from the Creative Europe desks, that it is a lot of work. And regarding the language question, that adds to the amount of work. But then again, we have the case of France, which is actually the main applicant country, and is also a country that where it's more customary to do work in French. So that will kind of be a counter argument to what you're saying. When it comes to the dominance of English in the future in the circulation of European programs, I think 2 days ago was a really interesting development that the EU is now starting to think about excluding British content from the European quotas. And I think what we have here is an amazing moment of opportunity if you are on the European side, where one could make the point that this makes dubbing even more important in order to make products, for example, from Eastern Europe more accessible. And I mean, the current dubbing nations are also the nations that have the biggest TV audience. So again, this feeds into what Luka was saying, and we in Detect have evidence that there is far more production going on than just the Nordic German co-production of Scandinavian titles. But maybe Creative Europe has kind of missed some of the opportunities of being part of fostering these trends, because in a few years we might suddenly see European crime production running dry, not meeting the demand that will be rising if British content is in the future excluded from the quotas.
Yeah, I just add a word to this, but already Catherine has said everything. Actually, the point is to lower the access barriers. That's the very issue. It works for the industry as soon as it tries to access this kind of funding. It's working with the relationship with the audiences, and so kind of. No, it's bad to say like that, but before trying to elevate everyone towards a European shared framework and so on, it would be better to take a step down and to make more accessible, more widely accessible everything, and then it will follow, I guess. But I'm not sure. I'm just joking here, but one of the things that is actually creating more a sense of European community is the championship, the football championship, or something like that, more than a lot of other aspects. And with the crime narratives, as concerns its circulation, its reception with the audiences, as well as its development, this idea of make the most of it to make them accessible, it would be a good guideline that is not always been the case, I guess.
There
Well,
is a question
I can
on the
step in.
chat. Sorry.
Sorry?
Sorry, Luca. Sorry, please.
Yes. No, well, just a comment about the centrality of language policy in Europe. It's not just about funding applications, it's about circulation, but it's about, I think, very deep questions of European identity. So I think what the, you know, from what I read and what from the research we carried out and from policy, the deliverable we've written, there is no strategy in this sense in the EU. I think the EU is avoiding very crucial decisions. Do we need a European language in order to feel a bit closer? And if so, how can we still sort of protect minority languages and cultures? So I think what you're pointing out, Monica, is a really key question, and I'm afraid I don't have an answer to it. But I would add a little bit an extra consideration about the importance of subtitling as well. I mean, there is still a substantial portion of Europeans that prefer subtitling to dubbing. That's why we stressed, and Luka stressed in the presentation, that we need both. So there are, in fact, cultural consumption habits are tied to, are path dependent. So there's a huge, minoritarian maybe, but the huge portion of the European people that still prefer to watch films in TV series in original language. And also, I think that's another key finding, is that it really depends from the characteristic of the content. So we have, like in Sherlock, there's some research carried out by some Italian researchers that showed that if you look at short videos, so short excerpt from the series, there's no really difference between in terms of understanding the series, in terms of engagement with the series. But when you look at the old episode, then you have people preferring, subtitles over dubbing, and the attention and understanding and engagement with the series really changes according to social groups. So you have people that prefer subtitling over dubbing because of the social background, class distinction, class educational levels. So that's a little note on the importance of having both, and the importance of subtitling as well.
Thank you very much. It's a very fascinating topic. In fact, there was a question again about dubbing, but I apologize, maybe we're running out of time. So there is Caius Dobresco, who maybe wanted to ask a question in person. He could now be heard and seen. Oh, yeah, please. We cannot actually hear you.
Now it's better?
Yes, please.
Okay. So thank you very much for your presentations. They were extremely informative. But I think it's telling, that even now discussing the fate of Eastern European television production, don't really have Eastern Europeans on the panel. So I think this says something about how things also work in the academic areas in Europe. But on the other hand, I would point to the fact that restricting European media policies to funding is insufficient. And I'm pointing here also to the policy brief that DTEC is to prepare. I mean, the work that was done is absolutely great and relevant, but I would say that other aspects, other sensitive aspects, such as the image that they propagate, the measure in which such productions dispel, or on the other hand tend to solidify aggressive or insulting stereotypes, should also somehow concern the Commission. And we have such results. I suppose there are things like at least that come out from our research, and I mean, this is also an important thing, an important side that was rather less tackled, I guess, all in all. But as I said, at least a mention should be made. And I mean, if you want to comment on this, on the relevance on this, I would be very interested to know your opinion. And one last comment slash question. I assume that the low participation of, Eastern Europeans, at least, in the funding programs of EU also comes from the perception that the European Union is a monstrous bureaucracy. People that I know would immediately have these reactions. No European money, because it really means a load of paperwork. And you know very well what I'm talking about, because we have the same problem with academic projects and programs. So this might be also a feedback, I mean, considering the procedures as such and the means in which they can be made more flexible. So these were my comments or / questions to you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Caius. And I just take the opportunity, as I wrote in the chat, Pia, my Brigianse, that also asked the question, what can be done to increase the participation of Eastern European countries? So I leave to any of you the opportunity to reply.
Well, maybe Pia, why do you want to step in? Because you have another comment.
I actually think that the question that was the same, almost the same question as Caius just raised. So maybe we could try to reply to that before going to the other questions. One main point, and I do agree with you, Caius, about the stereotypes, as we've already heard a lot about these past few days regarding the stereotypization of Eastern Europe in Scandinavian crime narratives. So there is, of course, an issue there that in some ways needs to be tackled. However, as we've been informed by the policymakers that we've been talking to, the main issue is regarding the lack of applications from Eastern Europe has to do with the rights that needs to revert to the producer after 7 or 10 years from the broadcaster. And Eastern European broadcasters do not fit this criteria in the evaluation criteria. So it's a much more practical reason that we probably don't see that many Eastern European applications. On the other hand, going back to the idea of stereotypes, the way to measure that is probably within the criteria, both the past criteria and in the new criteria, fairly hard to measure, since this would fall under the category of the quality dimension of the evaluation. And quality, as we all know, is a very hard and complex concept. And I'm quite sure that the stereotype discussion could fit into that somewhere. And in the new program that we've seen, it's a much more fine-grained evaluation set of evaluation criteria that may probably and hopefully point towards a more fine-grained evaluation as well. So let's talk in 7 years and see whether or not the new program actually amended some of the issues that you raised, Caius.
I just wanted to add that at the moment we have like a negative circle in the fact that there are no applications because of the rights situation and because most of the quality productions that you, for example, have also been talking about yesterday, Caius, are from HBO Europe, which doesn't necessarily fit these rights issues, but then because they're also not applying, these shows can also then not be subjected to the evaluation criteria of what represents a European dimension. And I'm sure that evaluators will be sensitive to the negative stereotyping and not actually favor productions that go along the lines of exploitation that you were showcasing to us yesterday. But because there are no applications, this can also not be factored in. So yeah, and in terms of what could help increase applications, a more flexible approach to this rights situation could be a possibility, as well as making it easier for Eastern European applicants to actually attend the markets where they can do the networking and find those key distributors that are so important for actually getting you the funding. So facilitating networking and also support in the grant writing would be beneficial. And we've seen in Denmark that there is a lot of support and they have a well-oiled machine in applying, and they're also getting the funding. And I mean, this also double layer goes back to European funding issues that we're seeing in research.
Thank you again for that. Luca, you wanted to say something?
Just to complete the answer around the stereotypes with the other side, the circulation aspect and so on. Of course, we need to take into account that stereotypes are something that we can understand at different degrees, and sometimes it's actually stereotypes that helps the circulation of non-national European productions in other countries, and so that's a thing to consider, as well as stereotypes change over time. Everything is kind of a process, and that's also another issue that makes something inside a virtuous or vicious cycle, like the one Catherine was referring to, in order to go out of the stereotypes one step after the other, not all at once. Otherwise, there's the possibility of a rejection of the product. Dubbing in that is quite relevant, because it's something that can erase some of the original cultural aspects, and even stereotypes, can add other kinds of stereotypes, can choose whether to underline some of them and hide some others. So once again, it's kind of something that we can see already at place with the Netflix original productions in Europe, which is probably the most advanced players. All the public service televisions, national industries, and so on are kind of running towards this kind of model and learning by doing in this kind of trial and error process. I just want also to pick from the chat a couple of things that kind of are more or less subtitling these aspects. The comment by Pia on the research that has been done over dubbing and subtitling, the preference, if I know the language, I prefer the subtitles. If I do not know the language, it is better the dubbing. Once again, it's a process. It's something that changes along the way, and it's very interesting how this works. Once again, with this idea of lowering the barriers, the entrance barriers. And the other question, I do not remember who made it, on children's television programming. It's once again, even the subtitling countries are dubbing children's programming because of this need to make the things more easily accessible. Here probably it's another battleground where commercial global companies have already been working for some years, while an idea of a European transnational production or circulation of national products is still very, very much behind. Children's programming is one of the things that every national system intends to keep, at least for something like completing the school system and so on, but probably also something that could help in making more circulate this kind of products cross European, not just US or UK programming, or non-European programming, that could be helpful. Sorry if I put a lot of things together.
No,
Is there time for a last note on that? But
yes.
Really briefly, because to go back to what Caius was saying, I really agree with the fact that, you know, cultural policy is not just funding or providing funding, there are broader issues. He was pointing at the more textual issues or questions of representation. What I try to say in my presentation is that there are also huge industrial problems, and that the EU has tried to somehow address them, but the nation states, the member state, lobbied against it. So the weaknesses of sometimes what we imagine as the weaknesses of the EU are actually, you know, responsibilities of national governments. That's it. That's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
I don't know whether it makes sense.
I think that is a good way to bring to a crucial topic that maybe where we live, because the time is really up. but I can take the advantage of my position to just comment briefly that what you just said shows how your presentation, as well as Catherine and Kim's, proves that in the field of audiovisual media interesting and popular culture and so on, we see reflected exactly the same political imbalances that we see on a broader level, which I guess have very, very long historical reasons. And one of these reasons is language, because language shapes our world. And we know how many languages are not only in Europe as a continent, but even within the country. Italy is an example, perfect example. So, and since it doesn't exist in a European language, and the idea of creating or forcing, imposing languages from above would never work, the language of Europe maybe has to be translation. So dubbing is actually a form of translation that works better than subtitling. And as we're all saying is that there's no reason, thanks to digital technology, to oppose dubbing and subtitling. They can go together, they can mutually help each other. So we need to embrace really the idea of translation, which is a perfect metaphor for how we could try to bring the peoples of Europe closer to each other without pretending to make it one thing of them, because that's not ever going to happen. Also because language for millennia has separated us. If we now want to get closer, we need to try not to erase these differences, but exactly to make them work through a process of adaptation, also cultural adaptation and so on. So really, we need to leave now, and thank you so much to our speakers and to everybody who attended this panel, and to those who asked questions and participated in this very fruitful conversation. So thanks again, and see you in the afternoon, I hope, in the next plenary session, which is the Pipino Ortoleva's keynote speech. We really look forward to hearing this afternoon at 2:30. Thank you, and see you later.